we'll move on. We'll let Todd talk for 8 whole minutes on
8
PowerShell.
wonderful minutes. Well, not just PowerShell, but just tools. Yeah, So I am not a one-trick pony. I am a two-trick pony.
Apparently.
So you're not even a pony.
I'm not going to go there. That's a...
All right, everybody, welcome to Ask and Praxis. It's October 1st, and today we're going to talk about Microsoft 365 storage. We're calling this Moving the Space Needle in deference to our punniness. We are missing Carrie today, but she is having a nice little fall foliage vacation, so it's good for her to get out, and we're happy she's doing that. But the rest of the gang is here, and we are going to talk about storage. So storage, what do you start with in your tenant? And then we'll talk about automatic versioning. We'll do a recap on unlicensed OneDrive, which we did a session about, an Ask and Praxis session about a few months ago at this point. We will talk about Loop, Whiteboard, and Designer storage, because that's a little, oh, I didn't know that was the case type of thing. And then how to find, use storage. We're saving, I'm not going to say the best, but we're saving Todd for the last to talk about PowerShell and how to find, use storage. All right, let's move on. Starting with storage, I'm going to handle this one. What do you start with? So, and there's a link in our resources, but there's a great article out there that gives you this nice chart that helps you understand what you get to start with in your tenant based on the license type you have and how many users you have. So most of these, or all of these, excuse me, you can see start with 1 terabyte for the org itself. And then per license, you get some extra storage for many of the options. However, you get OneDrive storage sort of separately. So it's good to understand that your OneDrive storage, or the storage that your users have, is separate from your overall tenant storage and what you have to allocate towards sites and related Microsoft 365 group storage, because if we recall, all Microsoft 365 groups have a site underneath them, and thereby they are storage. So one of the things that we used to think a lot more about was site quotas, and now I don't know when it changed, but now we have the ability to either have storage set to automatically be managed or manually be managed. So automatic storage basically says your tenant storage is one big ball of storage, and each site just uses however much of that storage they need to, store the things that are being put there. If you are on automatic, then each quota for each site is set to 25 terabytes. So every site only gets 25 terabytes. And if you set it to manual storage instead, you can individually manage the quota for each one of the sites. So that's sort of how that works. And then last but not least, obviously, is if you run out of storage, you can buy additional storage by buying a product out of the admin center under the, the licenses thing called Office 365 Extra File Storage. And if you buy those, it's priced per gigabyte. So it says number of licenses, but really what that means is number of gigabytes you want. And I took a quick glance. It was like 21 cents per license, so 21 cents per gigabyte. You just add the number of gigabytes you'd like to buy, and then you add that, and you have more storage in your tenant. All right, so that's what you start with and how you think about it. Moving on to Mark Anderson, talk to us about the latest and greatest thing that we are talking about with pretty much every single client we talk to, automatic versioning for the win.
Right. Automatic versioning is a new thing 6 months ago, maybe something like that. And it's a much smarter way to manage versions. The way versioning works today in SharePoint by default, if you haven't changed anything, is every document can store up to 500 versions. That's a lot. In most cases, you'll never get near that. But if you've got a file that you're editing every day, or for example, you might get to that number of versions pretty easily. When you version something, when you create a new version of a document, essentially you're using up twice the storage. because there's a second copy of that document. And if you think 500 times a big file, that's a lot of storage. So the automatic versioning algorithm is smarter than that. It keeps all the versions within the first 30 days. And if you think about it, that makes sense. You might want to go back 10 versions. You might want to check what you said in version 30, 30 versions ago, whatever. After in the 30 to 60 day period, it only saves hourly versions. 60 to 180 days, it only saves daily versions, and 180 days and out, it only saves weekly versions. It's sort of similar to what we used to do in the old days with backup tapes. It's a very similar schedule, because the likelihood of you needing to go back to a specific hour 6 months ago is incredibly unlikely, but you might want to go back for a week or so. So this is the algorithm. You can devour that and understand it a little bit better. There is great documentation about all of this, and I've tried to link to all of the articles I got the facts from. So next slide, please.
We have a couple questions. Let me see if I can address those before we move on. I don't really know if I understand this question. Maybe one of you do. Mark asked, is the OneDrive, Mark Christman, sorry, Mark. Is the OneDrive storage still unlimited if calling PSS when needed and on a case-by-case basis?
I believe you can get that extended on a OneDrive by OneDrive basis still. Right. Years ago, it was unlimited, and then some guy kept his entire video collection on it, and he was using up 100 terabytes or something, and they realized that was going to be a problem. So. Yeah, but you can get that extended a bit, or at least the last time I heard about it, you still could.
Okay, cool. All right, moving on.
So how do you make automatic versioning happen? Well, there's a setting in the admin center. If you've never been to the admin center, you won't know that settings screen on the left, but there's a row there that says version history limits. That's a tenant level setting that just says, okay, when we provision something new, what setting are we going to use for versioning? The current version in your tenant, if you haven't changed it, is manually at 500 versions, and that's what we're all used to seeing. The new option is right above it automatically, and it's recommended, so of course you should do it. The great thing is, though, when you change to automatically, and it really is that easy, you click the radio button and say save, nothing happens. New sites, new libraries that you provision from that point forward, actually, I'm sorry, new sites that you provision from that point forward will have automatic versioning turned on. It won't have any effect on anything that's already in your tenant. So the next slide. And I could talk for a lot longer about this. I'm just going to give you the high points. So only net new libraries get the new automatic versioning setting. So it's not retroactive. Nothing happens unless you run some PowerShell scripts. The pictures on the right, by the way, are from one of the articles that I have in the references. So you can run PowerShell scripts. There are commandlets that help you with this stuff. Todd, sorry, I'm talking about PowerShell, and you don't get to.
The more people who talk about PowerShell, the happier I am. So drive on.
I'm gonna talk about PowerShell later too. Damn it.
And I've done these things for multiple clients. So I have some scripts that I'm hoping to share with the world because they're actually pretty helpful. You can run reports to understand what storage savings you might get if you were to switch to automatic versioning. So sometimes you have to convince somebody that this isn't a terrifying thing to do. Those reports can be really helpful, and they go down to the version level in a given site. You can change the settings on each site where you'd like automatic versioning to be applied with a PowerShell commandlet. There's actually a versioning setting at the site level, but you can't see it. It's not visible to you anywhere in the UI, so you have to use PowerShell to see that. And then you can also use PowerShell to trim versions from existing libraries, meaning, okay, I've got all these versions stacked up, and the automatic versioning algorithm says I could delete that one and that one and that one. That's not going to happen by itself, but you can run a PowerShell commandlet or a set of commandlets that help you to actually do that. These images are from those articles, and they sort of show you what the effect is. At the top one is if you turn on automatic versioning at the tenant level, only the new stuff, only new libraries and sites will inherit that setting. The bottom one is what happens if you've actually enabled it on existing libraries, which is a PowerShell. There's a parameter on those PowerShell commandlets. So you can do this, but it takes some work, especially if you've got a lot of existing sites. I might suggest that you focus on your largest sites. I've seen the savings be anywhere from 95% down. If you have something that's big and has lots of versions, or you're storing a lot of videos that you've edited a bunch of times or something like that. So it really can make a big difference, but it takes some work to get there. Casper.
It's just a comment on that one, because you can also activate this feature on a side-by-side level. So if you have highly regulated businesses where you are not allowed to use automatic versioning out of the box, then some of the sites can be enabled and some of the sites can be left off. That's pretty nifty.
Sorry, I should have said it that way. It's much like permission inheritance, and sort of it's like everything in SharePoint. You know, there's an inheritance model which you can sort of break the inheritance connection. So you could set a specific site that's got a lot of traffic, for example, to be automatic versioning while your tenant is still set to manual. Good point. Thanks, Casper.
That's a good point.
That's about all I have to say about that.
We're having a big discussion about that SharePoint isn't a file server, and about
but it is
too. So
it's got a document library, and you just dump everything in there.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. And it's a, you know, it can replace a file server with good information architecture and structure, but it shouldn't be used as a file server. So it's a really good discussion that's going on, sort of adjacent, and as well as the archive. You know, SharePoint archive being fairly expensive, and sort of having a better lifecycle model to handle when you're archiving what you actually do with that content, and moving it to Azure cold storage versus Microsoft
I would
SharePoint
say, though,
archive seems like a better direction.
I would say, though, that the automatic versioning idea has value whether you're very low on the maturity model and you really are just using it as a file share, or you've got a very good, solid, sophisticated information architecture.
100%.
It's totally orthogonal to that dimension. So it's a value anyway, especially since people just tend to want to keep everything. This is a way to keep everything, but to sort of feather out and trim out the stuff that doesn't need to be there anymore.
Couldn't agree more. Right?
And
it's
it is
just interesting that's the sort of. All right, let's move on. Right. Derek, do you want to recap us on unlicensed OneDrives?
Yep. So we've done other Asks and Praxis before, specifically about the unlicensed OneDrive account changes that were made. But starting this year, Microsoft has started to charge for unlicensed OneDrives because essentially people were unlicensing accounts and hanging out terabytes worth of data that didn't actually count. And for ever and ever and ever and ever. And again, just like the versions, that's not a good archival strategy. Just hanging on to a OneDrive. So one of the things, and I've seen this with my clients, is that this could be a huge sinkhole. Essentially, there's many hundreds of accounts that are just sitting around taking up space. And many of these people, especially for one of my clients, had been gone 2 or 3 years. And so these were documents that were being kept. Nobody knows that they're there. Nobody knows that they're around. And they had like almost an entire terabyte worth of data that was being taken up by these unlicensed OneDrives.
Ah, they were lucky, only a terabyte.
Well, when that was 1/6 of their entire storage, they were running into pretty specific storage issues. So, one of the things to make sure you do if you're running out of space is make sure that you check the status of these OneDrives. You can do that from the SharePoint Admin Center. There, under Reports, there's a button that says OneDrive Accounts, and it'll give you this image over here on the right-hand side, which shows you, this one only has, 9 unlicensed accounts, but you could have several hundred depending on the size of your organization. It'll also show you all up the size that it's taking up in your tenant. And this is coming directly out of your storage quota. You can also see some of the metrics that you get there to determine, how many of the accounts are being set by a retention hold or retention period, or whether they're just users that have no license. And then you can make decisions based on that. You can actually go into the details and you can download an Excel report. And then you can go and you can talk to the, maybe the managers of the users to determine whether or not they still need that content. And then eventually you can delete it, hopefully. One of the things that I will point out here is this report, if you are looking at this, doesn't update real time. So this updates like daily, every other day. So if you're clearing out storage, you want to make sure that you're not using this as a go by, because what'll happen is you'll delete something in this one update.
Just to clarify, because I was getting confused when you talked, but then I realized what you were actually saying. The unlicensed OneDrives, the storage of those is going against your tenant quota. OneDrives for licensed users have their own quota of 1 terabyte, and that's a separate thing. But once they're unlicensed users, then whatever is stored in those is taking up storage from your overall tenant storage quota. Just wanted to clarify that.
It's not the storage pool for SharePoint though. It's actually charged separately. And where one of our clients got into real trouble is they had a 7-year retention policy on all OneDrives. And so not only could it not go away, they were going to have to start paying for it.
I see. Okay.
So
good.
So where there's retention period and retention policy, that matters a lot, because a lot of organizations have, maybe turned on retention policies because it seemed like a cool thing to play with once, and it's actually doing things. And the preservation hold library in SharePoint sites gets all the versions that you delete if you trim things out, if you don't do something about those retention policies. So there's a balancing act here with both OneDrive and SharePoint.
Okay.
Francis made a comment, except that it does not apply to old versions from before. Seen treasures of gigabytes in video versions recently. I'm not sure I follow that personally, but maybe he means retention policies.
I think I was referring to Casper's stream content.
Oh.
Above.
Okay, I misread it. Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. All right. I misread it. Read it too quick. Trying to multitask. All right. Let's move on to Loop, Whiteboard, and Designer storage. So, fairly new to the Microsoft 365 ecosystem is Microsoft Loop. And for all that aren't familiar, which pretty much everybody should be, Microsoft Loop is this tool that we can use to sort of work in collaboration, live collaboration with each other in a more real way than, in a more robust way, shall I say, than like Word co-authoring or something like that. It's a very robust way for us to sort of real-time work in conjunction with each other. And so those artifacts have to be stored somewhere, and depending on where they're created and who they're created by, depends on where they're stored. And the ones that I wanted to address are the first 3, which is the Loop app, my workspace stuff, and the Loop app in a shared workspace stuff, and the Teams channel workspace loops. Those 3 are all stored in a SharePoint embedded container. And so SharePoint embedded is a newish, a couple of years, about 2 years old offering from Microsoft that basically is a headless SharePoint site that has all the benefits and goodies of SharePoint in the sense of retention policies, and it inherits all the tenant settings that you have, but it's a container that you can only access via API, so you can build your own user interface for it, and the storage of that when you're building them for yourself is based on consumption. So instead of being user license storage, it's consumption-based storage. So any SharePoint embedded container that you create as an organization, you're paying separately for that storage. However, in the case of Loop, the way that works is that Loop creates a container, and that storage gets charged to your quota. So whatever you have for tenant storage, those Loop workspaces end up in that tenant storage grouping. So it's important to know about them, because if you've got a ton of loops all over the place and they're getting big and they have a lot of stuff in them, that could be eating up some of your tenant storage and you wouldn't necessarily realize it. So let me dig in. So the My Workspace is stored in a user-owned SharePoint embedded container created by Loop. The container is lifecycle managed to the user account, so it's deleted when the user account is deleted from the organization. All the different types of Loop workspaces count against your organization's SharePoint quota, but for Todd, you can use PowerShell to go find out where they are and how big they are and if they're unlicensed or not. And as an added note, Copilot Pages and Copilot Notebooks also use the Loop in the My Workspace container. So that could also bloat those the My Workspaces up for each of the users. So if you have your storage and every user is really highly using Loop and Copilot Pages and Copilot Notebooks, it's sort of like they have kind of like a little mini OneDrive, but it's counting against your tenant storage versus and again, you're not seeing this in the sites list, and the tenant storage number is going down, but you're not seeing it in the tenant sites list in the SharePoint Admin Center. So it's good to know about. Again, Loop workspaces inherit that 25 terabyte max that sites have as well. All right, we'll move on. We'll let Todd talk for 8 whole minutes on PowerShell.
Wonderful minutes. Well, not just PowerShell, but just tools. Yeah, So I am not a one-trick pony. I am a two-trick pony.
Apparently.
So you're not even a pony.
I'm not going to go there. That's
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
moving on.
We've talked a lot about storage and how much it costs, and don't let it get away from you, and should you turn this on or turn this off to mitigate your storage needs. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can tell just how much storage you're actually using to see how much of this is really important or not. And so at the smallest level, each site has a storage metrics page. And it's affectionately referred to as Storeman because that's the URL. It's in layouts, storeman.aspx. But in any site, go to the gear, and then site information, you might have to go to, I think, communication sites.
Settings.
Yeah, there you go. That communication sites have another thing in there too. Site information, site settings, and then on that page that has like 650 links on it roughly, buried in the bottom right, there is a storage metrics link that you can click that will take you to Storeman. This is an excellent opportunity to use your Control F skills and just start typing storage to get you to that link. But that takes you to a page, and that's the image that I've got in there, that shows you every document library in your site sorted by how much space it's using. So this is a great way to find out if Mark said, turn on that automatic versioning for your biggest sites. Well, how do you know which document libraries to turn this on for? This is one of the ways to find out. And this is a great thing. And you can actually burrow into that. So that presentations link there at the top that's got 25 or 18 gigabytes of data in it. I could go into that and it would show me the folders inside of there, and I could go inside of the folders and see which folders, so you can really find out where all your storage is getting used. So that's at the site level. Now, if you want to look at your big tenant and see how much space everything's taking, you can go to the SharePoint Admin Center and then go under Sites, Active Sites, and that will give you at the top, in the top right, that will tell you how much tenant storage you're using, and that counts everything. And then I think for that one, also for each site, you can see how much space is being used and you can sort by biggest to smallest. So again, you can bubble up those big sites in there and kind of see what's taking all your storage. And then go to that site, look at the store man page, see what's taking the sites there. Julie and Mark already mentioned this, but it was worth reiterating. There are some things you can do to automatically control how much space your sites are using. Those are in SharePoint admin under settings, storage limits, site storage limits. So that's the whole automatic or manual. And that's something back in the day with on-prem SharePoint where like every site must have a site quota. You're a terrible admin if you don't have a site quota. Now we're like, automatic, probably not a terrible idea. You'll probably be okay. So that is a shift from the on-prem to online thinking. And then Mark mentioned that there's a version history limits thing we can look at in there. Casper mentions in the chat to look in the recycle bin too. Yep, that's a lot of stuff can get put in there. That stuff does rotate out every 93 days though. So if you wait long enough, it'll just go away. You don't have to worry about it. And then everybody's been leading you up to the finale, the big triumphant finale of the PowerShell you get to run. I could talk a whole half hour on the PowerShell that you can use to deal with storage, but I decided to limit myself to just 2 really good commands to get you excited about this. One of them, these are both using the PNP PowerShell module. So if you're not already familiar with that, you should be. And if you're not, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. I'll help you get that started. But these are 2 great commands to learn. One of them is get PNP tenant site, and that will get you all of the sites in your tenant. And then one of the things you can do is you can select the storage usage current, and that will give you the usage of your all of your sites. So then you can do something like you can pipe that into a grid, you can pipe that into a CSV file, you can do whatever, and that will help you make some decisions based on how big your sites are. And then you could also do a sort by descending and then, get those to bubble up at the top. So get PNP tenant site is kind of the meat of that command. You can go from there. And then we mentioned that loops, sneaky little devils that they are, they like to create this other little way to steal space from you. And the other thing about loops is, as far as I know, there's no UI to find out what any of your loops are doing anywhere. Just how much space they're taking, whether they're, or not loops, embedded sites.
SharePoint
embedded.
Yeah, the containers.
You have to use PowerShell.
You get to use PowerShell
because
there's
you
no.
Have to. You can use REST too. So I don't really actually have to. I can go.
Well, that's fun too. REST is fun. So loops are stored in SharePoint embedded, but also just SharePoint embedded in and of itself can cost you money, and you can't find a good way to expose those. So that second one will get you all of the SharePoint embedded containers in your tenant. And so every SharePoint embedded container has to be hosted by an Entra ID app. So that first part of that command gets you all your Entra ID apps. And then in each one of those, it just looks to see if there's any SharePoint embedded sites in there. And Loop has its own owning application ID, that command or that parameter I'm using at the end. So it should find those. I don't have a test tenant that has any embedded containers in it right now. So I wasn't actually able to test this and play with it and get it to work. But this should expose all of your containers and all of your loops that are taking up some of that space, costing you storage in your tenant. So, and the other thing to mention, if you don't want to use the PNP PowerShell, the SharePoint Management Shell is a lesser PowerShell module that you can use, but it has complementary things. There's a get SPO site and a get SPO container that will get you this information too.
Thank you, Todd.
Yes, my pleasure.
I appreciate you. Just to clarify, because I think we did go back and forth and we're being confusing. Let's be super clear. The unlicensed OneDrive storage, when that passes and you have to start paying for it, happens under Microsoft 365 archive settings. And I put in the chat a link to the description of how that works and how you set that up, but it's essentially pay-go. So you pay for that storage separately. It does not affect your entire tenant pool of storage. So sorry, we were sort of not on the same page on that.
I was incorrect.
But I think
I said the wrong thing.
And
I misunderstood the wrong thing, so it was all good.
I've had a lot of people say, well, I just won't sign up for Microsoft Archive then, and it won't get charged. Doesn't work. You still end up with the pay-go.
Awesome. All right, so I think that is all we had for today. Here's a list of a bunch of the links. You obviously can click on those live, but we'll have them in the notes on our webpage that goes along with this episode. But in the future, October 15th, we are at Collab Days New England Live, and we are the Simpraxis crew going to do an offsite. And so just like last year, we're going to do an Ask Simpraxis Anything offsite edition for Collab Days New England. So that should be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to that, to being live with you from the MTC in Burlington, Mass. And so obviously, if you are in the New England area, we would love to have you at our free Collab Days New England event. That's October 17th. That's a Friday. Patrick and Todd are going to be speaking. That registration is open, so definitely join us if you are in the area. And then Mark and I will be at TechCon 365 in Dallas in early November. We have a code Simpraxis for $100 off if you would like to join us in Dallas. And that is all we have for today, but thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you. If you have any questions, obviously the chat is open and we would answer those questions when we get to them. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great one. See you in a couple weeks.
Bye. See you in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Simpraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.